Hi, this is Lou Ann Worley with Rock and Book Reviews, and I'm so happy to be here today with our Hiram Bertoch. Uh, Hiram, tell us a little bit about your childhood and a few key experiences in your life that has been memorable.
Yeah, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. This is such a privilege to get to do this and to get to talk maybe a little bit about myself, and as I'm promoting the Apollo Salvatoir. And so I grew up in Utah. I'm from just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up on what I would call a large farm. I think that, there's obviously people have much bigger farms, but we had about 500 acres, and I just had an idyllic childhood. Really wonderful parents who were very supportive, and spent my summers, working on the farm with different kinds of animals and working hard in fields. And we had a big orchard, a big garden. So I grew up just doing just all the things that make childhood. They give you a lot of opportunity to just enjoy a childhood, to be a child, and to learn all the values that you need to be successful. And that gave me the opportunity too to do a lot of imagination. I can remember daydreaming constantly, just getting to as I'm working in the garden, just getting through that hard work that my parents were cruelly making me do, imagining stories and things. And that really was my fishing in a pond. We had a big pond on our farm that I got to go fish, and riding horses, and so just an idyllic childhood.
So did you have other siblings?
I did. I come from a large family. I have 5 siblings. So one brother, 4 sisters, and also cousins, and grandparents that were close by. This is a family farm that was settled by my great-great-grandfather. So it had been, divided into smaller pieces. So I was surrounded by and grew up with cousins and grandparents, and all within walking distance.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great way to grow up.
So for 15 years, you were an entrepreneur. Was this before or after your college years?
So I started college right when I was 21. I served as a missionary for my church. And when I got back from that experience, I went right into college and did some of my special ed classes. But then very quickly, this was back in the beginning of the internet, 1998. I guess it's not the exact beginning, but it's pretty close. And the internet, I think, you'd say more like 1994, but is where it began. But by 1998, it was still not very much going on. And, and it was just this opportunity that was wide open. So as I'm starting classes, I'm also starting little companies and things online, which kind of grew. Nobody was competing there. There was, none of the main companies that were strong, the brick and mortar companies, were even looking at the internet. So it gave opportunities for people that nobody had ever heard of, like Amazon and Yahoo at the time, and subsequently they kind of floundered and were replaced by Google and a lot of other people. And for my part, I was building a network of educational services that had, and at the time in 1998, nobody was doing anything like this. None of the textbook companies or anybody else in the educational sphere was even looking at the internet. And so I built, back before YouTube was a thing, I had dozens and dozens of educational videos that were online on different topics, and thousands of articles and interactive games. I had an entire math program that would take kids through their entire, for homeschoolers, but subsequently was used by school systems. And so this grew from 1998, and kind of that took me away from college. So to answer your question, so after I did about a year of college, and then the Kids Know It Network started to balloon and grow, and I was just like, what's the point of, why do I need to finish college when I'm already, I've got this business that's ballooning. At the height of the Kids Know It Network, which was 2013, I had millions and millions of monthly visitors across the network of services, and ended up selling it to investors. And in 2013, who I'll say murdered it. They told me they were going to keep it going, but then after a couple of, not too long, they kind of divided it up and sold off the pieces. And so now it's parts of other companies like education.com. And I had no hard feelings there, but it was kind of sad to, to see all my hard work and now it doesn't exist anymore. But, and that gave me opportunities to, selling that, and what I got from selling it gave me opportunities anyway. So I can't have hard feelings, because it kind of set me up to be able to do what, the things I do now. But yeah, so I started college before I became an entrepreneur, but then entrepreneurship kind of took over and pushed college to the side.
So you did go back to college and get a biology degree and also one in earth science. How has that affected your writing and your life now?
Yeah, and so in 2013, when I sold the Kids Know It Network, and if you had asked me when I was a kid what I was going to be when I grew up, I would have told you at any point, I would have said that I'm going to be a teacher. Always just had a high regard for teachers, and that was always my dream. And so when I sold my company and I, found myself in a position to kind of be able to do whatever I wanted, I thought, I looked around, 35, that's too young to retire or whatever. So I thought, I'm going to go teach. And of course, to teach, I need to have a bachelor's degree. So I took some time and I finished my bachelor's in earth science, and got a teaching certificate in Utah, a license, and went in to teach in middle school. And subsequently, since then, I earned actually 2 master's degrees. I have one in biology and one in instructional design. And what they really did for me is open the door for me to be able to teach, which has just been such a incredible experience for me. I mean, it's something that I just absolutely loved every second of doing. As far as how it's impacted my writing, it's given my writing some credibility. I wrote, prior to having any degrees, I wrote thousands of articles and books that have been on science topics that have been read. The articles on the Kids Know It Network, for example, have been read by millions of people, and they were written before I had a degree in any kind of science topic. But now that I do have a degree, they have more credibility, and a lot of them are still out there. And, there's something about having letters after your name that kind of lends them credibility. So many of those letters were added after the fact that I wrote the articles, but they're accurate. They're good articles. So it's given me some credibility in different spheres where I write sometimes.
I commend you, because that is, I think, the toughest age to teach. I did subbing a lot and a few years ago, and I'll tell you, those middle grade students they're a handful, because they're just going from childhood to adolescence, and they're just trying to find themselves, and that's a tough age.
You kind of have to know where you belong as a teacher, and everybody belongs in a different place. When I went into teaching, I originally thought I would go into high school. That was really my goal. And when I went to student teach, they couldn't place me in a high school. There was no high school slots available. So they put me in a middle school, and I had 9th graders, which counted as high school, but I also had 7th graders, and I had more 7th graders, actually I had 9th graders. And as I was student teaching, it became apparent to me within like a week that I belong with middle school kids and not high school kids, because I just had so much fun with those middle school kids. I don't know, they're old enough that you can have an intelligent conversation, but they're still young enough that there's a lot of magic and silliness, and you can sing with them, and you can be goofy. And I wore pink pants to school, bright pink pants, like fluorescent pink, they glow. And we had a lot. Well, you can see my unicorn behind me. That's actually
I was noticing that earlier. That's so cute.
Yeah, that's Madam Sparklebottom. And she was on my wall at school. In fact, most of the things behind me are from things gifts students have given me, or things I had at school that I brought back with me when I left education.
Well, it sounds like you were a fantastic teacher too.
Oh, I loved it.
That's a big part of it there, if you can really enjoy what you're doing. Okay, so when you were teaching them in middle school, what was the most challenging part? You told me the fun part. Now, what's the most challenging?
And I'll just add on, as far as fun part too, it's the relationships with the kids. You know, I got to teach 1,500-ish, more than that, kids, and many of them still keep in touch. And you know, they're getting into some of them into their 20s now. I get invited to their weddings, and you know, I get to go to their Eagle Court of Honors and their graduations, and it's just been such a privilege to get to know. And I remember each one of those 1,500 kids, and they're just, you know, that's when I ultimately, hopefully in a very, very long time, many years, decades down the road, pass away. I suspect, aside from family, that teaching will be the thing that really stands out as the most important part of my life. As far as the challenges go with that, you know, teaching is very, well, you were a sub, so you'll relate to this. It's very, very challenging, very stressful. You know, keep in mind, I grew up on a farm, and I knew what it meant to work hard. And I was the CEO. I bootstrapped a company from the ground up, and you know, and I knew what it meant to work long hours, and I thought I understood stress. But when I went into teaching, my eyes were opened. I had never experienced the level of stress or the you know, the exhaustion that teachers do. Yeah, you're paid for 7-8 hours a day, but you easily work 12 or 13 hours a day, because there's all the grading and everything. And then you carry everything home with you. You worry about your students, and you know, you're constantly thinking. It's not something you can just set aside. And you know, and then you're there at school, and you're on your feet all day. You can't even go to the bathroom when you need to. You know, you're just your whole day is in the classroom. And right now there's a sub shortage. You can't get subs, and you know, there's a teacher shortage, so you have large classes. And very appropriately, because you're working with very vulnerable individuals, the most vulnerable individuals in society. And so I don't suggest that it's inappropriate, but everybody's eyes are on you as a teacher. You've got parents and administrators and state legislators. So it's very stressful and exhausting. I would come home every night and just collapse in my chair and just be wiped out. You know, it would take me an hour just to be able to just decompress. So, but I loved it. And it was, you know, in 9 years that I just absolutely adored, but it was very exhausting during those 9 years.
Oh, I got a taste of that. I'm sure I didn't experience anything like you have, but I was subbed for people on maternity leave and stuff like that. But one time I had subbed for a 10th grade teacher, and she had complications. So I was there for 3 months. And I couldn't believe the amount of homework that I had to correct, and all the hours, you know, that it took up in the evening when I was through. And even though I tried to correct papers during my free period, it didn't cut it.
And then you've got trainings you need to attend, and you know, meetings and committee meetings, and you know, emails for parents you have to respond to, and phone calls you have to make home. And it's a very difficult job, but you know, it is rewarding. There's no more rewarding, at least from my perspective, there's no more rewarding job. You know, I have these 1,500 kids that I just love to death, and I'll carry those relationships for the rest of my life. So the price was worth it, but it was a heavy price.
I had high school and I loved it. And but I also did substitute in middle school and elementary. And they have different type of challenges. So,
Yep.
but I think of all places, middle school was absolutely the most difficult for me because
You have to always be happy and, you know, enthusiastic and even a little bit, I don't know, zany or silly or goofy. It takes a lot. In elementary, I think it's more you have to be more mothering, you know, more, maybe that's not the best word, but you know what I mean. More, coddling is a great word. Yeah. Middle school is more zany and outgoing and, you know, and just always on. You have to always be on. I would always say I'm the loudest one in my class. And I'm the most obnoxious one in my class.
That's the way you have to be, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Before your 11th book, you had a regional bestseller, The Mountain Christians, and bestseller, An Otter's Guidebook. Tell me about it.
Yep. So The Mountain Christians is a book that I wrote. Prior to writing that book, I had written quite a lot of articles and things that were, and actually a few books, but they were almost entirely nonfiction. So on science topics and, you know, educational topics. And I think the more you write, the better you get. And I had a lot of practice writing nonfiction. And so I think I got fairly, where I could write that kind of writing pretty quickly, nonfiction. But I didn't have the skill set really to write fiction. And it's a very different skill set. With nonfiction, you write more in a passive voice, but a passive voice absolutely kills fiction. It sounds dry. It doesn't sound warm and, you know, sunny. It kills a narrative. And so I have a story. Actually, this Apollo Salvatoir has been in my heart since I was 10 years old. But I didn't feel like I was qualified yet to write a narrative. And so I wanted to practice. And so I took the story of my great-great-grandfather, James. I never reveal in the book that he is my great-great-grandfather, but he is. And tell the true story, as far as I could find. And I did a lot of research on it. I even flew out to Italy and actually found the house that he grew up in, and it was still untouched. It was up there on the side of the mountain, just the way they left it. There some relics that they actually left were still there. Found documents and things. It was really neat. So I did spend about a year researching, and then I put it together as best as I could and wrote the story of my great-great-grandfather coming to America and ultimately to Utah. That one was received really well in the Western United States. I had sold several thousand copies throughout, predominantly Utah, but then, you know, Idaho and Wyoming and some other areas around there sold a number of copies. An Otter's Guidebook is a nonfiction, and it's taking an otter. I forget. I think I did 10. I want to say 10 chapters. And each chapter looks at a different aspect of how an otter, some sort of behavior that an otter does, and how lessons we can learn on happiness. Because otters are so loving, or at least they seem to be. You know, they're so they're my favorite animal because they're snuggle and they just seem to be happy animals. And so they're my own musings, really, my own experiences, but from the perspective or through the lens of an otter. And that one sold fairly well as well throughout the United States.
I was going to say, that sounds fascinating. So
yeah, I don't remember exactly why or how I got the idea for that, other than, you know, I've always liked otters, and I wanted to write a book, and maybe it's a little bit pretentious because I'm not an expert in happiness. I don't have any, speaking of letters earlier, I don't have any letters that would qualify me to be somebody who would speak on happiness. But, but it was kind of to my kids, you know, and now my grandkids. This is how I have found happiness, but comparing it to an otter. So.
Well, is it written for children then?
No, it's written to adults, but I give it to when my daughter met her husband, for example, I said, here, you're going to read this book. This is how I'm going to treat my daughter.
Well, I was going to say, I think I think we like to learn about animals and their habits and so forth. But it would be more fun to compare their habits to, you know, human habits. So I think that was a great idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned that your Apollo
Salvatoir.
Sha-Shu the dragon. You mentioned that has been in your heart since you were 10.
It has.
The story behind that.
Yeah, so I've always spent time just, you know, I have this runaway imagination, I guess. I've always just, in fact, I would often turn the television off and put a book aside because the story in my head was louder than, you know, what I was watching on the screen, and just would prefer to live in my imagination. And I've done that as long as I can remember. I still do that. So I'd be mowing the lawn and I'd be, you know, imagining some story about how the grass is, I don't know, at war or something, and I'm mowing over it. Or, you know, I always have stories going on in my head, and a lot of them are the same stories that I've been evolving and expanding. And the one in particular, Apollo Salvatoir, is my favorite, and the one that I've spent the most time in. You know, and for the last 35 years, since I was 10 years old, I've gone there into that universe many, many times. And it started in a particular scene, which I'm not going to say right now because that's in the third book, and I don't want to quite reveal that yet. But the story in my mind started with one event, and then I had to figure out from there, a 10-year-old boy had to figure out from there, okay, now how did that event happen? How would all those characters end up in a situation like that? And then so I worked from that position back and from that position forward, and unfolded this whole, over the years, this whole universe with, you know, probably upwards of 100 characters and a couple thousand years of history, and all these stories and side stories that I've spent, you know, hours upon hours as I've laid in bed waiting to fall asleep, or driving in my car when I was a little boy, just, you know, laying somewhere, just imagining these stories. When I was 10, I actually tried to write it down for the first time, and attempted to write a novel. And I spent several weeks one summer with a notebook and writing a novel, and it was terrible. Yeah, I got to, and I mean, I didn't know this back then, but, you know, rough drafts never are very good. But, you know, as a 10-year-old boy, I didn't know that you're supposed to do multiple drafts, or it just sounded terrible to me. So I was very frustrated, and I, you know, threw the notebook away. I wish I still had it, but I don't. It's largely the same story, actually, as, you know, it's been updated in my mind over the years a little bit with technology and things, but it's largely the same story. Apollo is actually, in the book, is 10 years old, and that's not coincidental. That's how old I was at the time. You know, he's stayed 10, and I've, you know, grown up, but that's, you know, that's why he's 10. That's where I was at the time that he came into my mind.
That was a question. Is that a land or a person? So it is a person. It
is, yes. Yes.
So where does the dragon come in?
Well, you'll have to read.
that's kind of that's a spoiler, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is.
I'm anxious to read it. Okay, but you, as a young boy, you did something else amazing. You had a particular conversation with a special person. Tell us about it.
Yeah, and that was a neat experience. I'm still in awe of that.
I'm in awe because I can't imagine someone so famous.
Yeah, you know, and so I'm very frustrated, and this is literally I throw the notebook in the garbage. I'm like, this is terrible. And in that moment, right on this, you know, within a few minutes of throwing that notebook away, I went and I picked up the phone because, you know, a 10-year-old boy doesn't know any better. I knew how to use information at the time, and so I picked it up and I called the operator and I asked her, you know, will you connect me with Orson Scott Card, please? And she did. She found his number, and yeah, and he answered the phone. So, you know, within just a few minutes of me being frustrated throwing my notebook away, I'm on the phone with Orson Scott Card, who was my favorite writer, still is, by the way. And he wrote Ender's Game, which is a book that I loved. I've read it many times, still read it. occasionally, just because it's such a good book. But Orson Scott Card spent the next hour on the phone with me or so. I don't know exactly how long, but I would say it's about an hour. He spent quite a bit of time, and he walked me through character development and talked about my story and story writing and storytelling, and encouraged me. Just said, don't give up. You just try again, and really encouraged me to continue with the story. So that at the time, and I thanked him, little boy, and hung up the phone. At the time, I had no idea, what a unique thing that was.
I can't imagine. It says a lot, but now I have even more respect for him that he would take that time with such a young boy.
Yeah, just randomly out of the blue.
Yeah. Nobody even knew. So.
Yep, and just spent time with me, and really, it was a neat thing for me. Something I'll never forget.
So, what can you tell us about your book without spoiling it?
That's a good question.
Do you have it there where you can show us?
I do, yeah. And so this is my book, Apollo Salvatoir, Sha-Shu the Dragon. And again, it is a story that has been in my head for a very long time. It's about there are two main characters, and they both started in my head right about the same time, Apollo and Ling. So Tan Ling, but her name is Ling. Asians, the last name comes first. So Tan Ling and Apollo Salvatoir, and they are best friends. And they, through a series of events, mainly due to Apollo's father and his expanding business empire, and his because he's busy, ends up. The two of them end up through different means in a lost, and I don't want to say where, but lost in a world, let's just say, in our world, but in a part of the world with strangers in a different culture that they don't understand, and have to figure out where they are and how to survive, and really have to face their own lack of confidence, and learn to get control over their emotions and their physical bodies. And just it's a story about survival. It's a coming of age story along the way. And really what I focus on in my writing are the emotions that both of them feel, and who they become as a result of those emotions, and as well as some lessons that I kind of hope readers will pick up along the way about feeling confident in yourself, about destiny. I think everybody kind of has, it's kind of an innate almost feeling that we all have a destiny, and that there's something we're supposed to do. And sometimes we wonder, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I must be here for a reason. What have I contributed to society? What am I going to be remembered for? And so I really try to address that, a lot of that is through being an ordinary person, and, the importance of just, that you do have a destiny, and you do matter, and you are contributing, and just being you and being who you are, that is important, and that has value.
So how many more books in this series do you plan on writing?
When I wrote this book, which is the first, I laid it out because, again, the whole story is in my head in detail, and has been for many years. And I wanted to keep the books all as close to the same size as I could. And so I kind of plotted it out so that I would know, if I want to keep them all the same size, and how many books there needs to be. And it works out to 7. So the main story arc has 7 books. There's a lot of side stories. I'm writing one right now, actually, that aren't part of that main story arc. There's probably enough content in my head that I could easily write 15 to 20 books in I'll call it the Apolloverse. But the main story arc that follows Apollo and Ling will be 7 books. There's a lot of lessons on emotions, I think, that we all experience about self-doubt and being shy or being quietly confident, or being able to meet your and carry the weight of your destiny, and having to do something that you feel like is bigger than yourself, having to survive and thrive. And so those are the lessons that carry throughout the series. I think there's I hope, a very satisfying end to the first book, and I hope that you and readers will love the characters as much as I do. These are characters that I just adore. That, to me, they're real people. And this is why I didn't write the book until I felt like I was ready. This is why I wrote Mountain Christians as practice. As you read it, I hope you'll feel a love, and just that you'll relate to the characters in the way that I do.
I think there's a big need in the world today to have books that are uplifting and help. I think so many people now struggle with self-image and lack of self-worth.
And a big part of the story is Apollo and Ling having to look at and confront the expectations of others versus what they know to be right, and or figure out what is right. And throughout the book, I flash back to earlier times, and Apollo in particular, his childhood, showing a close relationship with his mother and some of the lessons that she taught him, and how he uses those lessons to find strength as he's now alone and in a different place where there's different expectations on him, but how he draws on the lessons that his mother taught him to find strength. And so, yeah, I think those lessons are important, and I hope they do resonate.
So is it more for youth or more for family reading?
Hopefully it'll be enjoyed by all. The target is middle school and young adult, and I really had a hard time placing it because it's kind of right in that gray area between the two. But for the most part, the lexile, or the reading level, is more, it's a little bit lower. I tried to keep it towards the middle school level. But then a lot of the themes would definitely be enjoyed by a family, and I think and hope that would be enjoyed by adults as well.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
Thank you for the opportunity. This is really kind of you, and I really appreciate letting me share a little bit about this, in particular, Apollo, and this book that is just, to me, is more. I've cared about all my other writing, and I always try to give my best, but this matters a lot more to me. This is my story that I've cherished, and I haven't shared it with anybody. Thank you for letting me share, and hopefully I can share with others the stories, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. And there will be a giveaway for a print copy for US, Canada winners. So be sure to visit rockandbookreviews.com to enter the giveaway there. Okay, and so it's been my pleasure. I've just totally enjoyed visiting with you. And we hope that you will search the universe through books. Bye now.